I'd like to welcome you to our second David Saurman Provocative lecture for this semester. My name's Jack Estel. I'm a lecturer in the Department of Economics. I know some of you, but not all of you. I'm sure I'll meet more of you as time goes on. Before I go any further, I hope that we'll all, including myself, turn our telephones either off or to some other function that hopefully won't interrupt us. I have a friend who loves to call me during class, as my students can often tell you. One of these days I'm going to take his call. There you go. After this lecture, we're going to have a meeting of the Barstool Economists. You don't actually have to be a member. You can just come and join us over at Flames Restaurant, if you know where that is, across from Martin Luther King Library, on the corner of 4th and San Fernando. And we will have some no-host cocktails or whatever, something to eat, and plenty of discussion. So the instructors in the department, both full professors and lecturers, enjoy going over and getting an opportunity to talk with students that we don't always see every day. So please join us, feel free. This series is named after David S. Saurman, who was a longtime professor here, was one of my mentors, along with Lydia Ortega and Rudy Gonzalez. And 10 years. And we miss him greatly. He passed away in a sort of untimely fashion, but he was a master of microeconomics and sort of became my hero. So we use this lecture series to remember him. And I cannot actually think of Dave without seeing him sitting with a glass of wine in his hand telling stories about the South. So anyway, I'm happy to have you all here tonight. I hope you enjoy this talk. The lecture series is designed to provoke you to think maybe differently about things than you currently do, at least to open up ideas that aren't necessarily part of the conventional wisdom. And we're very fortunate tonight to have Don Boudreaux with us. I met Don several years ago while I was a student here. It was only several years ago. And he came to a colloquium that was put on by Ben Powell, who was here at the time. And I very much enjoyed our conversation. We were reintroduced at a conference this summer, and he kindly agreed to come back and speak here. And I hope you enjoy this discussion. A little bit about Don. Don is from what I just found out is the biggest university in Virginia, George Mason University. It's also a public university, which most people don't know. Don is a professor of economics there. He spent most of his life in academia, although he spent 4 years with FEE, the Foundation for Economic Education, where he was the president. So he's seen that side as well. He is back at George Mason now. He's very prolific. I don't know how he gets all the things done that he does. He writes letters to the editor on economic illiteracy that he finds in the news, and he writes to most of the prestigious newspapers and news media in the U.S., and he says he has about a 7% hit rate, which is pretty good. But his estimate was about 5,000 letters in the last 3 years. In the last 10 years. Still, that's pretty, I don't know how that's... But in his spare time, he wanted something to do, so he and Russ Roberts created a blog site called Cafe Hayek, and you can go and check that out, in which he posts every day. So gives us all something to think about. I'm kind of feeling like a slacker now. Anyway, I hope you'll give him a kind hand, and Don actually has written in many journals, not only the popular media, but also has a book called Globalization, which he finished in 2008. So please welcome Don. Come on up.
Good, I'm sounded. Thanks, Jack. It's an honor for me to be here. I knew Dave Saurman, coincidentally enough. I did my Ph.D. at Auburn University back in the early 1980s. I was a toddler back then. And Dave was on the faculty at Auburn. And so when I picture Dave Saurman, can we turn that down just a little tiny bit? Yeah. Thank you. It was echoing me. When I picture Dave Saurman, I actually picture him in the South with a long neck in his hand. And I remember Dave fondly, and of course, like everyone else, was grieved at his untimely passing. And so it's a special honor for me to be speaking at a seminar named after him. And of course, at San Jose State, which is one of my favorite institutions. It is my second time here, but not a day goes by that I don't encounter something from someone at San Jose State, a scholar, a former student. It's I like to think of it, pardon my arrogance, as the George Mason of the West. So I'm honored to be at the George Mason of the West. Many of you know that there are a lot of people who are actually at George Mason who are teaching here, and we get a lot of students at George Mason from San Jose, some of whom return to teach here. I want to talk to you tonight about a narrative that has been around for almost 20 years, and it's still around. I think the narrative is fundamentally wrong. I want to give you some evidence why I think it is fundamentally wrong, but it is a narrative that is widely, indeed unquestioningly, accepted by most of the mainstream media, by many politicians, and by a lot of people in the academy. The narrative goes like this. American living standards after World War II accelerated or grew for nearly all Americans pretty steadily. In the mid-1970s, they stopped growing for middle-class and poor Americans and continued to grow only for the richest of Americans. Since the mid-1970s, only the top 1% or the top 5% of Americans enjoyed any real growth in their standard of living. Ordinary Americans, middle-class Americans, have stagnated. That's the narrative. It is accepted by the mainstream media and, again, by many in academia as an unquestioned truth. I'm going to give you some evidence why I think the narrative is mistaken. I'll also give you some evidence to begin in favor of the narrative. The narrative, like most such things that gain traction, does have a kernel of truth to it, but I think it's a very misleading kernel, and you'll see why. I got the idea for this talk, or to challenge the narrative, because I grew up in the 1970s. I'm happy to say my brother, I grew up in New Orleans. My brother, Ryan, is here. He has a construction company in San Mateo, and we both grew up in the 1970s, and I remember the 1970s. They were okay. Our parents were working class. My dad was a pipe fitter in a shipyard, and my mom was a secretary and then a clerk in a hardware store. We weren't miserable by any sense, but I remember the 1970s, and I remember, it seems to me, that as time passed, things got better. And it's very iffy to draw conclusions from one's personal experience. You never know if what you're experiencing is a reflection of what's happening to the general population, or is it just a reflection of what's happening to you personally. I think that my personal experience actually is a reflection of what's happened to the general population. And ordinary middle-class Americans' living standards have improved greatly. Another source of inspiration for this talk comes from an economist in Dallas named Michael Cox. Mike Cox and his co-author Richard Alm wrote a book in 1999 called Myths of Rich and Poor, and I shamelessly steal from Mike Cox a method that he uses in order to evaluate living standards. I have to say that explicitly because this is being taped, and if it gets out, I don't want Michael Cox to think that I'm pilfering his work. I mean, he's a very creative scholar. So in a way, there's nothing new about what I'm doing, but I hope it'll be informative and also entertaining as well. I have some nice pictures to show you. So we could put the question this way. Has more economic freedom helped Americans since the mid-1970s? The reason I put it this way is because I suspect that the mainstream media's obsession with this stagnation thesis, as I'll call it, things have not gotten better since the mid-1970s, is somehow rooted in the fact that starting in about 1978, under Jimmy Carter, not Ronald Reagan, although Reagan continued some of it, but starting in 1978, there was something of a movement back toward more market-friendly policies. We had surface transportation deregulation, airline deregulation, banking deregulation, some deregulation of telecommunications. Tax rates were cut. 1978, of course, was the year in which Proposition 13 was enacted in California. So that since the late 1970s, it was more of a movement toward the market. And I think a lot of people in the mainstream media think that must mean that ordinary Americans are being crushed by corporate America. It's by no means the case that this regulation has been as extensive and full and as complete as a lot of people on the political left like to portray it. The United States was never in my lifetime, and I was only born after World War II, even though I know I look a lot younger. I never ever recall living in a laissez-faire, however good or bad that might be, a laissez-faire society. There have been some deregulations since the 1970s. There have been some new regulations, the Americans with Disabilities Act, for example, in 1990. But let's grant, as I think it's true, that from the mid-1970s up through the 1990s, it's been a period of at least reduced regulation. The rate at which regulations occurred was reduced. So has this greater economic freedom hurt the middle class? And let's see if I can get this right. There we go. Or another way to put it is this man a menace to the middle class? Many of you would know this is the late, great Milton Friedman. Milton Friedman died in 2006, unquestionably one of the greatest economists of the 20th century, and unquestionably the single greatest public spokesman for freer markets and a freer society. And his ideas that he promulgated since the 1940s, many of them came to fruition in the 1970s and led to some of the deregulation that we had. So some people like to blame Milton Friedman for causing ordinary Americans to stagnate for these past 30 or 35 years. There is some evidence for this narrative. For example, if you adjust for inflation, usually using the Consumer Price Index, the CPI, and look at before tax money income, so the wages or salaries that workers are paid, not counting the fringe benefits. Look at the inflation-adjusted before-tax money income for the median American household. That household in America that's right in the middle. So Bill Gates would be right at the top. There'd be some very poor family right at the bottom. Look at the median. That measured income has indeed stagnated since the mid-1970s. Today, it's only about 18% higher than it was in 1975. That's, even though it's a little bit higher, that's not much in the course of 37 years. Also, inflation-adjusted hourly money wages for the median non-supervisory, basically production line workers, wage and salary workers, not hedge fund managers or college professors. Non-supervisory workers. That has hardly budged. There are various measures of it, but you'll see a measure that I give in just a moment, about 4% higher. 4% higher over the course of 37 years. That truly is stagnation, if it's true. In 1912 dollars, if we take today's dollar value and we convert 1975 dollars into those dollar values, we see that in 1975, the median earning, the earnings, hourly earnings for a median non-supervisory worker were translated into 2012 dollars $19.70. Today, that worker earns $20.42. So it's all going up all by, what, 72 cents. That does seem like real stagnation, a 3.6% increase in the hourly wages for the median American worker. If you sincerely believe that the American middle class is declining and suffering and stagnating, you look at that statistic and you say absolute positive proof of the proposition. Median worker, non-supervisory worker, adjusted for inflation, virtually no growth over the course of 37 years. But it's just a kernel of truth. We could talk pretty abstractly about, well, how to adjust for inflation. Are inflation adjustments reliable? There are many different ways to adjust for inflation in addition to the consumer price index, the purchasing power, various measures of purchasing power will give us different measures of inflation. We could talk about changes in the size of households. This narrative, I should say, comes not only from the left. This is my colleague, Tyler Cowen, who's definitely not a man of the left. Many of you probably know him. He is the chief blogger at Marginal Revolution, one of the best and most famous economic blogs in the world. Tyler, his very popular book, The Great Stagnation, which was published in 2011. This is a quotation from Tyler. Median family income is the single best measure of how we are producing new ideas that benefit most of the American population. Yet the picture is depressing. This is in a book called The Great Stagnation. As I like to point out when I talk about this book, I do find it an irony that a book entitled The Great Stagnation was published as an e-book. Just ponder that. I've told Tyler this to his face, so he understands me. This is a man of the left, Robert Reich, former labor secretary under Bill Clinton. This is from a Financial Times piece that Reich had in 2008. Although he's written many other things like this. This is I almost chose this in at random. These kinds of claims are very common, and I'm quoting Reich. Almost all of the benefits of economic growth since the 1970s have gone to a small number of people at the very top. In other words, ordinary Americans get nothing, have gotten nothing since the mid-1970s. Is the narrative correct? Again, we could talk about some abstract ideas. We could talk about how, as I started to say earlier, how inflation inadequately accounts for changes in product quality, discuss different measures of adjusting for inflation. Oh, before I go off, I just have to show you this neat picture. Here's an example of product quality change. I took this just a few weeks ago in my home. It's a picture of that celery. And this is a bag that the celery came in. I bought this celery at a local supermarket. The big supermarket in the D.C. area is called Giant. So I bought this at the Giant. It's like Safeway, the Giant supermarket. You can't see it. Actually, can we turn these lights out? Is that possible, the ones up here? If so, I think you get a better view of my nice pictures that I'm going to show you. This is a seal. You run your hand across it, and it seals it. It keeps it fresh. Now, that's a change in quality. It's a really small change in quality. But that kind of seal on a bag in which you bought celery in the 1970s was not available. You couldn't keep your celery fresh that way. Now, you buy celery, it comes in that bag, and you can seal it. How do you account for that small change in quality? And that's just one of innumerable examples that I could give you for how quality has improved, and hence making it difficult for inflation adjustments to accurately measure changes in purchasing power over time. I just love that celery bag. I really do. We could also talk abstractly about how since the mid-1970s the per person size of the median household has fallen by 11%. So even if the real value of the income of the median American household hasn't budged very much over the course of 37 years, because the number of people in that household have fallen, the amount of income per person in the household has actually risen by more than 18%. It's actually risen by close to 30%. Still not great, but it's a somewhat different figure than you get by looking at the 18% figure. We could talk about how much more worker compensation or payment to worker over the years is now paid in the form of non-wage or fringe benefits. A larger portion of ordinary American workers' pay today comes as fringe benefits in addition to the cash payments, contributions to health care premia, contributions to pensions, are the big ones. We could talk about what happens to a statistical measure, such as an average or a median, and how that does not necessarily tell us what happens to the individuals who make up the statistical group. The example I always like to give, suppose we measure in here the average height. We calculate the average height of everyone in this room, and it comes out to be 5 feet 9 inches. Okay? And then someone, after we take that measurement, brings in an infant, a newborn infant, born just earlier today. And then we recalculate the average height. Well, the average height will fall because the infant's below the average. That infant will drag the average down. But none of us would think, oh my gosh, I'm shrinking. Let's do something about it, right? So you have to be careful when you encounter averages or even medians. You have to ask, does the change or the situation in the average or the median, does it reflect what's happening to actual individual members of the population that average is meant to describe, or is it a statistical artifact of the way the data are gathered and calculated? But I don't want to talk about any of that. I want to use a more direct method. So let's get rid of problems with adjusting for inflation, and let's just ask, how much time did a typical American worker, that typical non-supervisory worker in 1975, have to work to buy any number of different goods compared to how much time his or her counterpart, a typical non-supervisory worker in 2012, have to work to buy a different array of ordinary goods? That is a picture of a Sears catalog. Now, many of you are too young to remember a Sears catalog. The last one was actually printed in 1986. This one was from fall of winter 1975. I entered my senior year of high school in fall of 1975. So I remember this time very well. Fortunately, the lights are drowning out the beauty of the style of the clothing. Because the 1970s clothing was just unbelievably exquisite and subtle in its taste. This is a picture of a cover of a Sears catalog. I have bought one thing in my life on eBay, and it's that catalog. It's true. I bought it 4 or 5 years ago. I went on eBay. I bid for it. This bidding was intense. Bid went all the way up to 99 cents. I won the bid. I had it shipped to me overnight. It cost me $14.99 to get it shipped to me overnight. Right? So I paid, basically $16 to get this old Sears catalog from my senior year of high school. Again, for those of you who are too young to remember the Sears catalog, this was really the Amazon.com of our day. Didn't work quite as fast, but that's what we had back then. You have the real thing. We had the Sears catalog. They did basically 3. They did the fall, winter, spring, summer, and the Christmas wish book, which was always my favorite because it meant that Christmas was coming. So I got to get out of school. So this is a picture of the Sears. So what I'm going to do for the rest of my talk is show you some pictures of various items from the Sears catalog with the prices that were charged in 1975 for those items, and then compare those prices to prices today for similar items today, and look at the amount of time it took the ordinary worker to buy that item in 1975 compared to the amount of time that it takes a typical worker today to buy that item. By the way, most of these pictures, except this one, I'll explain that in a moment, most of these pictures were taken with this little device. This is my, we all have our slabs now. This is my slab. And so I got this catalog, and when I was preparing this talk a while back, I took out my catalog, and I stood above the catalog, and I took a picture of it with my phone. Took a picture of the page I wanted. And I got my 15-year-old son to help me crop the pictures and put into my PowerPoint presentation. You'll see that he was better at cropping some of the pictures than others, but he's 15. You can forgive me, he has a short attention span. All right, so let's start with some items. This is a 10-cup drip coffee maker. By the way, it's no timer, no clock. You wake up in the morning, you do it, and you press the button and start it. It cost, I don't know if you can see it, in 1975, it would set you back $36.49. Now, the median non-supervisory worker in 1975 earned an hourly salary of $4.73. How many hours did that worker 37 years ago have to work in order to buy that beauty? That worker had to work 7.7 hours, nearly a whole day of work, to buy a 10-cup drip coffee maker. I want to press my telephone here. That won't work. I'm going to press. This is a 10-drip coffee. I dragged this picture off of the web. Right? It takes 40 minutes of a worker's time today. The typical worker today earns $20.32 per hour. Given the price of that coffee maker, the typical American worker today would have to work just 40 minutes. So 75 and nearly a whole day. Today, less than an hour. A razor, 6.3 hours to get that nice electric razor. 2 hours for that razor. I didn't do much with clothing for a variety of reasons. One is, being perfectly serious, the visual effect of looking at 1970s clothing is so stunningly awful that I didn't want to put you in a bad mood or a trance, particularly given that Halloween is coming, so you might think it's some sort of holiday joke. But also, and more seriously, really, it's very difficult to find all cotton clothing. Most of it was polyester. Kind of stuff we don't wear today. Not wool, polyester. Not cotton, polyester. I found a few cotton things. Here's a pair of jeans. Jeans haven't changed much. Jeans was just as popular in the 1970s as they are today. You could buy a pair of jeans, all cotton, from Sears in 1975 for $6.97. So if you were that ordinary worker in 1975, you'd have had to work an hour and a half to buy a pair of jeans. This is a pair of jeans from Target. You have to work an hour today to buy them. So the cost of a pair of jeans, an ordinary pair of jeans, has fallen by 33% in terms of the amount of work time required to acquire a pair. That's significant. This is as salacious as this talk gets. I'm looking at the briefs, all cotton briefs. Get a package of 3. It would set that worker back 75 minutes of work time, 1 hour and 15 minutes to toil to buy a package of 3 new all cotton briefs. Today, 50 minutes. Price of underwear has fallen. By the way, I don't have time to get into it. Underwear has been a major sanitary advantage created by the Industrial Revolution. I just want to put that in your head so you can ponder that. It's true. I'm being serious. Going through that catalog, one of the amazing things is what's not there. One of the things that's not there, we'll see others later, one of the things that's not there are pictures of luggage with wheels. You could not buy luggage with wheels. How funny would it be if you go into an airport today and you see someone carrying luggage? That'd be weird. Everybody rolls their luggage today. All luggage has wheels. No luggage back then had wheels. I chose sort of the mid-range luggage that Sears sold back then, probably the luggage that the ordinary American worker would have bought. And this lovely piece of luggage would have cost that ordinary American worker 7 hours of work time to buy. Now, that person could have gotten wheels because you buy the separate extension. You could buy the wheels, but they didn't come with the luggage. You had to buy it separately. You bought this thing that had wheels. And that set you back 4.4 hours of work. So in total, if you wanted to get a piece of luggage that you could roll through the airport, actually you weren't flying back then probably if you were an ordinary American. If you wanted to roll through the bus station, it would cost you 11.4 hours of work. 5.5 hours, and with the wheels. Right? So price of luggage has fallen. An automobile battery, 9 hours in 1975, 4.9 hours today. Fallen by a significant amount. Again, in terms of the number of hours that the ordinary American worker has to toil. I like this. We all need exercise, particularly as we're getting older. That happens, by the way, for those of you who are young. You can't avoid it. $74.95 in 1975. Look at it. Look how beautiful it is. The Dr. Seuss suit doesn't come with it, but it cost nearly 16 hours of work to buy that exercise bike. Today, 5.4 hours of work. In other words, at the price that sells for, the American worker today making the median, non-supervisory worker making the median wage would have to work 5.4 hours to buy that, as opposed to working 15.8 hours 37 years ago. Music. That's an old 45. You put your needle on the turntable, we turn around. This is the Beatles' Yellow Submarine, by the way. I actually own that record. I used to own that, not that very one, but one that looked exactly like that. It cost 13 minutes to buy a 45 in 1975. Now, you got two songs, because there was a reverse side. There was the B-side. I don't remember what was on the B-side of Yellow Submarine. Blue Jay Way, maybe. How do you take a picture of music downloads? That's the best I can do. Right? 3.8 minutes to buy one song from iTunes. So 13 minutes versus 3.8 minutes. It's true you only get one song, but so let's say two songs. So 7.6 minutes to get two songs versus 13 minutes. So music is, and notice, and this is the kind of thing, that it's very difficult for statisticians to adjust for in the dimension of quality. If you wanted that, so forget about the sound of the quality. You couldn't play this in your car, by the way. Turntables worked awful in automobiles, right? And don't think of it as a compact disc. You didn't. Right? That's not what it was. But if you wanted that, you said, "Oh, I want that song. I really like listening to Ringo sing about living under the water." Right? So you get in your car and then you drive to the store and you'd pull out $1 and you'd buy the record and you'd run back home and you'd put it in your turntable. Now, if you want it, and I'm sure I do it. Even I do it. I'm not very technologically sophisticated. I'm sure you do it. You hear a song or someone reminds you of a song. "Oh, I like that." 5 minutes later, there it is. It's in your hand. And you can listen to it immediately. And it doesn't scratch. Ever. And you can transfer it to your computer. And you can play it in your car. You can play it on your Bose machine at home. You couldn't do that with the record. Clock radio. $59.50 in 1975. Cost 12.6 hours of the ordinary worker's time to buy that thing. 30 minutes today. Now, even that is almost an exaggeration. One of the amazing things about today is that innovation's happening so fast. Who buys clock radios anymore? This is what we have for clock radios. At least that's what I use. It's basically free. I buy my phone, and my phone is also a clock radio. I have to catch a flight to go home tomorrow, unreasonably early, and so I'll set my alarm here. It didn't cost me an extra, basically nothing. Typewriter. Again, one of the many things that's not available in this 1975 Sears catalog are, obviously no DVRs, no DVD players, no CD players, no digital photography, no computers. Sears' best typewriter cost basically $280 sets you back 57 hours of work if you're an ordinary non-supervisory worker in America in 1975. I'm sure it's a very good typewriter as far as typewriters go, but try surfing the web with it. Really, really difficult. Someone pointed out earlier to me today, though, this does have an advantage. It has its own printer is built in. Right? When you type on the paper, it's already printed. You don't have to go through the bother of trying to get it printed. Right? You have that. So the electric typewriter, and they make a point of showing you the electric cord. Right? It's an electric typewriter because you could still buy manual typewriters. They didn't cost as much, but they weren't as good. Let's look what we have today. And now you'll see really the difficulty of adjusting for quality. It's a MacBook Pro. 52 hours versus 57. So I think, well, it's kind of close, same number of hours, virtually. But really, look at that. And it doesn't have its own printer. Right? We'll grant that. But it's how do you compare? How do you compare the two? That versus that. You reverse the numbers. Suppose that costs 57 hours and that costs 52 hours. Would anyone say, "Oh, I'm going for the 52-hour one. It's cheaper"? I think you'd still go for the MacBook Pro. No digital photography, as I said. This is Sears' best 35 millimeter camera. For those of you under the age of 30, these things use something called film. It's a really primitive process. The cavemen invented it. I hope there's no one from Geico here. You put the film in this cartridge, and then you snap the picture. You didn't know how well it came out. Maybe your subject's eyes were closed, or his tongue was sticking out, or the flash wasn't quite right. There's glare. You didn't know how it came out, and then after you took however many exposures were on the film, you took the film to a developing place, and you came back a few days later, and you picked up your pictures, and you saw how many came out and how well they came out, and whether they came out to your liking or not. You had to pay to get it developed. So not only you buying the camera, you have to buy the film, you have to pay for the developing. Cost 73 hours of work, nearly a week's worth of work to buy that camera. But it was Sears' best. It's a digital camera, one hour, less than 2 hours to buy a digital camera. Again, this is almost obsolete. The quality of, I only have two, you'd think I'd remember, 2 pockets. The quality of cameras on these things is improving dramatically. You could tell, well, not this picture, but I took that picture with this camera. Right? So, and what can I do? It's developed immediately. I don't like it, I can discard it. Stay there, I want to take it again. That one didn't come out. Take it again. I want to send a picture to someone abroad. I live in D.C. If I want to send a picture to my brother who lives in Nevada City, I can send him a picture of my son or something that I find interesting. Right away, immediately, he gets it. And he can send it back to me. And then you can do photoshopping with it. Put a mustache on Salma Hayek, the person after whom my blog is named. I wanted to find something in the catalog where quality was not an issue, or arguably not an issue. This is the best thing I came up with. A 4-drawer file cabinet. It's a metal file cabinet. Their standard size, the size of a standard file cabinet is today exactly the same as it was 37 years ago. I think the metal's pretty much the same. Probably maybe the composite's a bit different. These are probably a little bit heavier in terms of weight. It took 44 hours, if you were an ordinary worker back then, to buy a 4-drawer file cabinet. More than a week's worth of work. This is one today. Again, I don't think the quality here is much of an issue, unlike with the typewriter computer thing. 11 hours. So this is literally just 1/4 of the work time to buy that file cabinet, as opposed to that file cabinet. Automobile tire. I tried to get tires roughly the same warranty and same size and grade. 8.6 hours in 1975, 4 hours in 2012. Don't you love this? Now, imagine you have your new home and you're having friends over for a cookout, and there's your grill. That's the most expensive grill, that gas grill that Sears sold in 1975. Look at that beauty. I don't even see a handle on it. There must be one somewhere. Oh yeah, there's a little bitty knob right here. No, that's a gas grill. A week's worth of work to buy that gas grill in 1975. And you had to buy, the container didn't come with it. Today, 13.1 hours. And of course, the selection today is much broader. I had to almost choose one at random. This is sort of a medium price one. But look at that thing. I mean, if your neighbors are coming over and you want to impress them with your conspicuous consumption, do you want that or that? You want that. That's a real grill. That is a museum piece. But this sets you back less than 2 days' work. Microwave ovens. At Sears Best, 93 hours of work, more than 2 weeks of work to buy that oven back in 1975. 4 hours today. These are roughly the same size and roughly the same power. 4 hours versus 93 hours. I was telling someone earlier today that even this, I suspect, in the near future, this is going to be obsolete too, because I'm waiting for the day there's going to be the microwave app. You just zap your food. So it'll come free on your iPhone or BlackBerry, right? But you have to buy a microwave still now. But the prices come down. Dishwasher, 49 hours pretty much. I'm sorry for this is blurry. That's I'll blame it on my son. That's his fault. 12.2 hours. Calculator. Calculators, by the way, the price had already begun to fall by 1975. Literally just 3 years earlier, to get this calculator that cost $13.88, that same calculator, or one virtually identical to it, cost $99 in 1972. Price had fallen to $13.88 by 1975. So it wasn't that expensive, but it still took 3 hours of work for the ordinary worker to buy that calculator. And it's got you can't read it from it, a 6-digit display. You could go all the way up to 999,999. It would show, right? On there. And it did all 4 arithmetical functions. Add, subtract, multiply, and divide. All of them. And you can't read it, but I'll read it to you. This 6-digit electronic calculator adds, subtracts, multiplies, and divides with lightning speed. No more waiting. Immediately. It comes up. It's difficult for me to actually find on the web a calculator to buy. Right? I found one, 1.5 minutes. 3 hours, 1.5 minutes of an ordinary worker's time to buy a calculator. But like many other things, that too. There's an app that comes in all it's scientific calculator. Mine does more than just add, subtract, multiply, and divide. It does things that I don't know about. Right? I mean, mathematical functions that are way beyond my job description. But I can do them if I want. Automatically on here. And it does it with lightning fast speed, too. Vacuum cleaner, 26.4 hours, 3.9 hours. Look at that. If you don't know what that is, it is a workout bench, proudly advertised as having a polyurethane foam-padded top. Right? $59.99 cost nearly 13 hours of ordinary workers' time to buy that thing back in 1975. But my question is, if I were really serious about lifting weights, would I want to sit on that thing to lift weights? And my answer is no. I think I'd die. I mean, that, for those of you who are legally minded, that is a tort waiting to happen. Right? But that was Sears. That was a quality workout bench back in 1975. Today, 4 hours for that, and that looks much more sturdy. If I'm going to pump iron with the former governor, I'm sitting on that, and I'm avoiding that. Right? How do you adjust for the quality? I mean, the prices are different, but how do you adjust for the quality? How does an inflation adjuster in the Bureau of Labor Statistics, for example, or Department of Commerce, adjust for the quality of these two different things. Television. Sears Best TV. It's not high def. It is color, right? Because not all televisions back then were color. It had a nice, unlike, it's actually in a lot of ways better than TVs today. Try resting a wine glass on top of a flat screen TV. You can rest a wine glass. You could rest a wine case on top of that thing, right? It'll hold it. It's sturdy. No remote control, by the way. You could not find in a 1975, the catalog I showed you, you could not find a television that had a remote control. As someone said earlier today, remote controls back then were your children. And as my brother and I remember, that's what they were. My dad would say, I don't like that show. Ryan, go change the channel. But it does say, our best console color TV features soft touch tuning, a system so advanced that just a finger's touch changes channels instantly. So advanced, because before that, the standard was you went up and you went to the TV. Actually, trust me, I know those of you young think this is a myth, but it's true. You actually had to touch the machine, and you put your hand on the knob and you turned it to go to the station that you want. And those of a certain age will remember this. Even though that cost nearly 160 hours of work, so nearly a whole month's worth of work to buy that television, 1/12 of the year to buy that TV, it wasn't very reliable. It broke down frequently. The vertical hold and the horizontal hold were always going out. So again, those of us of a certain age remembers looking at the TV, and then the picture would start going like that. And so you'd reach behind it, you'd find the horizontal hole, and you'd turn, and you do like that. Or if you had someone, you say, okay, tell me, and you adjust the knob really gently, and then you get it to stay, and then you sit back down, and 2 seconds later, do it again. And then sometimes the vertical hold did the same thing. You get these diagonal lines going across the TV. And it would just get increasingly worse, and so you had to call out the TV repairman. You repaired TVs back then. Today you throw them away. Oh, the TV doesn't work, throw it away, go to Target and buy another. Right? The TV repairman. You wait a few days and the TV repairman would come out. He was always very polite. And he'd have these big suitcases full of tools and tubes. And he'd come to your house, and he'd pull the TV out, and he'd do his work. It's all very mysterious. And he'd push the TV back in, and you have a well-functioning TV for a few more months. Or maybe a year, if you were lucky. You had to pay the TV repairman to come out. But again, no remote control. 17.1 hours. Roughly the same. I got roughly the same screen size. And this is high def. This does have a remote. In fact, I wouldn't even know how to change a channel on a TV without a remote. If the remote's lost, what do? You say, well, here's the remote. Well, go do it manually. How? What do you touch? Yeah. Change. Right? And they come out, of course, now all kind of different sizes. You have TVs in your bathroom, kitchen, closet. Right? So the quality is strong. Let me mention one other thing. This is not as pretty a picture as before. Remember, so this narrative is that the middle class is being hollowed out by economic policies, globalization, deregulation. That's making us all poorer and reserving what little wealth is left only for the very top wealthiest Americans. These are data, most recent data available from the U.S. Census Bureau. I got these off the web just a few weeks ago. It's percentage of U.S. households earning incomes in these ranges. By the way, I didn't have this nifty laser. This is fun. Percent of U.S. households earning incomes in these ranges. These are in 2009 dollars. This is just for inflation, using the same inflation adjustment that these pessimists about the state of our economy use in order to say that ordinary Americans' incomes are stagnating. So these are 2009 dollars. And what these categories are, is 1975 and 2009, so we're comparing 2 different years, the percent of U.S. households earning incomes in each of these different categories. So what percent, for example, of U.S. households in 1975 earned annual incomes of $15,000 or less? In 1975, the percentage of American households earning $15,000 or less in 2009 dollars was nearly 16%. In 2009, that percentage, and this is with current recession, by the way, that percentage fell to 13%. So you have a smaller percentage of U.S. households earning in this. So the income earning group, that's the lowest. You have a lower percentage of American households today earning in that lowest income group. And keep in mind, the average size of U.S. households is today fallen. So the number of people in these households is probably lower today than it was in 1975. What about the income earning category 15,000 to 25,000? Again, we all recognize this is still very low income. These are still very poor people. In 1975, 13% of American households earned income in that category. In 2009, about 12%. So it's fallen by 1 percentage point. Not a lot, but still a lower percentage of households today earn income in that meager range than earned income in that meager range 37 years ago. What about the $25,000 to $35,000 range? A little bit better, still poor though. 12.3% of U.S. households earned income in that range in 1975, only 11.1% today. So that's fallen. 35 to 50K, getting into at least a little bit more respectable numbers. 17.3% of U.S. households earned income in that range in 1975, 14% today. What about this range? 50,000 to 75,000. 22.3% earned income in that range in 1975. It fell a lot, 18.1%. It looks like the middle class is disappearing, right? In all of these income, low to middle class, the percentage of households earning income in those brackets is falling. The middle class is being hollowed out. Where is it going? Here's where it's going. People earning income in the $75,000 to $100,000 range, household income. 11% of the families in 1975, 11.5% today. Went up by 0.5 percentage point. What about in the category above 100,000? It's the remainder of the category. In 1975, again using 2009 dollars adjusted for inflation, 8.4% of American households earned income of more than $100,000. Today, 20% of households earn income of more than $100,000. Remember, this is inflation adjusted. The middle class is disappearing, or if the middle class is disappearing, it's because the middle class is moving into higher income categories. I don't want to close or end by giving you the impression that I think everything is wonderful and honky-dory. I don't think that's the case at all. I could, if I were in a different mood, give you a long list, a litany of things that I think are wrong with economic policy in the United States, some of which I think, if the trend continues, actually does portend really bad things in the future. Not so much for me, but certainly for you, because you're a generation or two younger than I am. But the fact is, when you look at the data, the current narrative that says that middle-class Americans are living worse today, that there's no more middle class today as there was back in the good old days of the 1970s, when everybody was rich and happy as compared to today, that narrative simply does not square with the data as I interpret them. Now, I understand, because I spend my life doing this a lot, that, and this is fair, you can always quibble over data. Well, let's construct the income categories differently. Let's ask, why is that happening? Is it because more women are entering the workforce? We can have these discussions. These are important discussions to have. But we don't have these discussions until we understand the basic facts. And the basic facts are, as I think I've presented them. for a typical basket of goods that ordinary Americans regard as the essentials and minor luxuries of life, the amount of work time ordinary Americans have to expend to acquire those things has fallen since the mid-1970s, and in many cases has fallen dramatically. I don't have it up here, by the way, but let me say, it's also true for food. Food is a lot less costly today in terms of hours worked than it was in the 1970s. And the variety is greater. In the mid-1970s, an ethnic restaurant was Italian. So the variety is greater. The typical supermarket in the mid-1970s stacked 5,000 different items. I don't mean 5,000 individual units, but 5,000 different items. So Bibb lettuce, iceberg lettuce, cayenne pepper, black pepper, a can of green beans, a can of peas. 5,000 different items. The typical supermarket today stacks close to 50,000 different items. So the selection available to ordinary shoppers in a typical American supermarket today has gone up dramatically over the past 37 years. There are a handful of things where the percentage of expense has increased, in fact. Education, healthcare, and housing. Those are the three big ones. These are important ones. But even in these three, one thing to note about these three, first of all, is that there's heavy government involvement, especially heavy government involvement in all of them. But even in these three, let's consider healthcare. Yes, healthcare is a lot more expensive today than it was in 1975. But would you rather buy 1975 healthcare at 1975 prices or 2012 healthcare at 2012 prices? I think you'd rather buy 2012 healthcare at 2012 prices, even though it's much more costly, because it's a hell of a lot better than it was in 1975 on many different dimensions. Housing. Housing has gone up in price, in large part because of taxes and because of land use regulations, but also because the quality of housing has risen dramatically. A lot of things that are today standard in houses were not standard in 1975. The average size, whether measured in square footage or cubic footage of houses today, is much larger than it was in 1975. So people are getting more for their housing dollars. Education. This is my industry. This is probably the industry I think has stagnated the most. Until a few years ago, I would have taught, not using PowerPoint, I would have taught literally just as Socrates taught 2,500 years ago, using chalk on a chalkboard. That's not very much advanced over the course of a couple of millennia. But now I've graduated to PowerPoint. Education has, I think, not kept up as it ought to have. Education is mostly run by the state. We can make ideologically based claims about the value, the detriments, the merits and demerits of that fact. But even there, the value of a college education in terms of what it adds to your lifetime income has gone up significantly since 1975. And so, given that a lot of people, perhaps most people, go to college chiefly as a means of gaining human capital so that they can earn more over the span of their lifetimes, the value added of education has in fact increased in real inflation-adjusted terms. So what you're buying is in fact a better product than what you bought in 1975. So I think that standard narrative is mistaken. I'll shut up now because I think I've talked too long. If there's time for questions, I'll be happy to try to avoid them.
So I'd like to thank Don for sharing his thoughts with us, and I encourage you to think up a nice question to ask him or two, and let's see what we can do. I'm happy to walk around with this microphone and pass it on to you. By the way, I do want to remind everybody, I know some students will end up having to leave, but I do want to remind everybody our last lecture this semester will be on Thursday, December the 6th. We'll have Jonathan Williams here from ALEC, which is the American Legislative Exchange Council, and he'll be talking about rich state, poor state, and we can all guess how California will rate in that grouping. So please, who has a question for Professor Boudreaux?
For your statistic,
I'm sorry?
for your statistic, which you mentioned earlier, regarding the change in income from the 70s, the mid-70s,
Yep.
To the present day, from $4.70 to roughly $20. Is that household income? And is
that was hourly earnings. So
Hourly earnings.
the figure I used to divide into the actual prices that people paid was the nominal hourly earning.
Nominal.
Of the because we're looking at 1975 prices for like a coffee maker compared to 1975 wages for the median non-supervisory worker. And
But how do you compare nominal wages? How can you compare nominal wages then?
Well, the beautiful thing about this method, which again I stole from Michael Cox, is that you don't have to compare them. You just say, what is the amount of dollars that the median non-supervisory worker earned in 1975? Oh, $4.73. Someone earning $4.73 in 1975, how many hours does that person have to work in 1975 to buy a Sears drip coffee maker, a new automobile tire from Sears, an automobile battery? How many hours? Then you do the same thing for 2012. 2012 worker earns $20.32 per hour, the same median non-supervisory worker. How many hours does he or she have to work to buy a similar product available in 2012? And then what you find for almost everything is that the number of hours needed to work has declined.
How about two things, subsidies and cost of living? How does that factor in?
Well, in a sense, the data I gave you reflect cost of living. I think cost of living, in fact, has fallen.
I mean, those items that you mentioned, some of them in the Sears catalog, some of them were luxury items, like for instance.
Somewhat?
Some of them were luxury items, such as coffee makers. Like you don't need a coffee maker. I'm not speaking. I'm only speaking for myself here, but.
Yes, because I need a coffee maker.
Yeah. But I mean, for many, it would be considered, say, a luxury. And, like you say, would find it at work or something. You don't need it at home or something like that.
These items, again, which is one reason why I chose a Sears catalog. Sears, then as now, was not. It was the merchant to middle America. It was not selling to Hollywood stars. The Hollywood stars in 1975 were not shopping at Sears, just as they don't shop at Sears today. This was the merchant for middle America. And so, yeah, some of these items in that catalog were more out of reach to some Americans than other items. But I don't think there was a single item in that catalog that anyone, even in 1975, would have said, whoa, luxury, just unimaginable luxury. It was, again, a publication aimed at middle America by a merchant whose stock in trade, Sears, was to cater to the taste and hence the incomes of middle-class Americans. That's why those products were in there.
I was just wondering how much those statistics on income between the 1970s and 2012...
2009, the last one, yeah.
Are skewed by increases in the cost of kind of non-monetary benefits like health insurance and other kinds of benefits?
Well, if anything, the figures I gave you underestimate the increase of Americans into higher income categories because those are just cash payments. Those are payments not including fringe benefits. When you include fringe benefits, of course, people have even more. The total compensation is even higher. Because as you move up the wage scale, the portion of your wages paid in fringes tends to rise as well. So, but those figures were payments excluding fringes. There are more fringes now than there were in 1975 as a portion of total compensation paid to workers.
My question is with regards to the future outlook. You know, how back in 1975, what a working class person had to look forward to in terms of the opportunities for his family and his children to grow and so forth, as opposed to today where, you know, you hear it spoken that we're probably the first generation where our kids don't live better than the previous generation.
One of the, fortunate or unfortunate, depending upon how you classify it. Again, I remember the 1970s very well. I wasn't particularly politically aware back then. But for all of my adult lifetime, I can remember that thing being said. I can remember people in the 1980s, 1986, saying, wow, boy, these are tough times. Well, we know now they weren't. There is this inherent, I don't know if it's instinctual, I don't know if it's genetic, I don't know what it is. There is this bias in people to a pessimistic bias. We don't know what the future holds. When you look back on the past, then you don't have to be pessimistic about the past, because if you look at it squarely, you can say, "Oh, look, things got better over time." I don't know what the world's going to be like for my 15-year-old son when he's 35 or when he's my age, but the consistency of the pessimism that pervades public discussion, combined with the, in my view, overwhelming misinterpretation of recent historical economic trends, causes me to be optimistic about the future, despite the fact there's a lot going on in the policy area that I dislike, and that, as I said, I think it could make things bad. I certainly do not believe that the economy, the American economy, is on autopilot and nothing can change to make things worse. But my best educated, informed guess is that young people today, people enrolled as students at San Jose State, my son is a sophomore in high school, people being born in 2012, barring some incredible catastrophe, that their material living standards will be higher than are our material living standards, for a lot of the same reasons that people point to who think that those living standards will fall. Right? Americans' living standards will continue to rise because the Chinese economy is growing, because we have freer trade, because those things encourage a greater production of goods and services that lower the price of goods and services over time, increase the quality of goods and services over time. So I think those forces will actually make Americans' living standards better in the future. Can I guarantee it? No, it's impossible to see the future. But I don't see anything bad enough happening now that would reverse this trend in any significant way. Although I will say, I'm less optimistic now, 2012, than I was in, say, 2000.
The evergreen pessimism is over Social Security. I'm coming up on 72 years old, and when I start my first paycheck, well, I'm never going to get to Social Security. Well, I'm 72 years old. I've been collecting it for 8 years. I'm going to continue to collect it. And it looks like with a minor adjustment, it will continue. So I just wanted to second your statement that, there's certain evergreen pessimisms that are enduring that I'm not going to outlive.
Yeah, pessimism is, it does seem to be the order of the day. Again, I don't know if it's particularly our time, but it is widespread. Excessive pessimism.
One thing you didn't go over, and I'm not sure if this is on purpose, but how have government transfers affected, as in hurt or harmed, the middle class?
I could give you my opinion on that. I haven't studied that particular issue in any depth. If you just look at the numbers most of the data I gave didn't involve transfers. Most of the data that you hear today about, income distribution is before tax and before cash transfer payments. So when you take after-tax income and then you add in the cash transfers that government gives to many Americans, the distribution evens out somewhat than what is before tax. But I take it your question is more deep. You're asking if the transfer programs have made the middle class poorer than it would otherwise have been. I think so. I don't have any data to show it. I think it'd be impossible to get really good persuasive data to show it. I confess immediately what I'm saying now, it's almost a litmus test of one's prior political and economic beliefs rather than of any deep study. I believe that a government that is as large and as tax happy and transfer happy as ours is makes the economy more sluggish than it would otherwise be. And when an economy is more sluggish than it would otherwise be, the middle class are less wealthy than they would otherwise be. But the optimistic side of that is, and this is something my mind has been changed on over the years since I was what looks like your age. I've become less, as you can tell, I've become a lot less. Well, I'm a lot less pessimistic than I once was. The robustness of a commercial entrepreneurial society, I believe now, is very easy to overlook. Put differently, the market economy can take a huge licking, a huge beating, and still keep on working pretty darn well. Not as well as it would work if the beating were less, right? But still keep working pretty darn well. If I were a 20-year-old, if I were born a few generations earlier, and I say I turned 20 in 1933 or 34, I would have predicted the end of the world. So, well, there's no way the United States can survive New Deal policies. We just, it's awful. Now, I don't think the New Deal was good. I think it was harmful. But we survived it. And people who are pessimistic today, there are a lot of people who are optimistic today about what's going on, but people who are pessimistic today about the current course of government policy, I understand that pessimism, and in many moments I share as well, but I don't believe that the policies that we have today, more importantly, I don't believe that the prevailing attitude of Americans generally today are as depressing and as bad as they were in the 1930s. In the 1930s, there was a very real possibility that genuine socialism, not socialism light, genuine socialism, government ownership of the means of production, was possible. The percentage of the intelligentsia who called for it was a lot greater than it is today. The intelligentsia today just now say, in my view, rather frivolous, stupid things. The intelligentsia back then said really dangerous, stupid things. And so the robustness of America's free entrepreneurial economy impresses me and gives me hope that it can endure a lot. Not to say it can endure everything, but I think it certainly can endure more than I thought it could endure when I was younger. And that makes me happy.
I think one of your premises that we've had more deregulation than regulation since the 70s.
That's one of the premises of the people making that narrative. Right. And I granted it for the sake of argument.
Okay, so if you don't grant that, how does that affect the argument?
One of the interesting things about this discussion is a lot of people share this pessimistic narrative. Right? The few people, relatively few people, who dissent from the pessimistic narrative and sort of adopt the more optimistic one that I have about the course of the past 30 or 40 years, they all tend to be in the free market camp. Virtually everyone on the left accepts the pessimistic narrative. But it's interesting to me that that is a fact. I mean, that's so. I don't see an ideology in here. We haven't had anything close to laissez-faire since the 1970s. We've had some deregulation. We've had a lot of new regulations. Government hasn't gone away by any means. The extent of government's reach into our lives has been, to the extent that we've had deregulation in the late 70s, early 80s, probably brought us back to where we, at best, brought us back to where we were in the mid-1960s. At best, by some measure of these things. And so if I were on the left, I'm not, but if I were, I would look at these data and say, yeah, you see? You see how good the New Deal was? You see how good the Great Society is? See how good the labor laws and the occupational safety and health regulations that we have are? See, they're working. Americans continue to get better off. So when I make this, if I give this presentation, this is the third or fourth time I've given it, it strikes people as an ideological one. Oh, this is, I'm making an ideological point. I understand that, but I don't see it so much as an ideological point. I'm thinking, look, the data just don't seem to support the pessimistic narrative. You can then talk about why that's so from your own ideological perspective, but it's not clear at all to me that what I see as the unambiguous improvement in the living standards of ordinary and even poor Americans over the past 37 years. It's not clear at all to me why people on the left should reject that. Why they should not say, see, our plan's working. And if it weren't for you people on the right, these gains wouldn't exist, or they'd be fewer. So I don't see this as an ideological point, but it's always made into one.
Yeah, I looked at all the pictures you showed, and to me it seems like technological advances have accounted for a lot of the lower prices and improved quality of the products. Looking at the charts you have up here, the number of people at the higher end of the wage scale seems to have increased. Is a lot of that due to increased technology or productivity of the laborers?
Oh yeah, worker productivity has gone up. I mean, at the end of the day, over long spans of time, workers' pay is tightly connected to worker productivity. It's true. In some sense, it's the result of a lot of it's the result of technological improvements. But technological improvements just don't fall down from the sky. They themselves are the result of entrepreneurial creativity. They're a result of a culture, of a legal system, and institutions that encourage that kind of innovation, and more importantly, encourage that kind of innovation to become manifest in ordinary goods and services that are available for sale. If technological innovation were sufficient to create high living standards, then there's no reason why North Koreans shouldn't be as wealthy as we are today. Because technology for most things is widely available. North Koreans could copy it, and of course they're not. And so it remains in the institutions, the necessity of the institution to translate that technological ingenuity into real goods and services available to everyday men and women. That remains all important.
Hi. How do economists account for repurchasing power in terms of a product's retention or durability in terms of warranty? For example, today, a person might, purchase a computer every year or so, while back in the 1970s, he would purchase a keyboard and keep it for 5 or 10 years simply because it costs so much. So when you count, how much a computer costs today in terms of a keyboard, then you'd buy a computer many more times over these days.
Yeah, it's a good question. Obviously, the durability of a product matters, but you have to be careful. There's sort of physical durability, and then there's just economic durability, and the two are very different. I don't have any data on this. I'm giving you my honest impressions. Goods and services back in the goods in the 1970s physically broke down, were much less reliable than are goods today. It is true that if you bought that electric typewriter back in 1975, you may have used it for 5 years. Very few people buy a computer today and use it for 5 years. But it's not because the computer breaks down. It's because technological advances in computing technology make newer models more attractive, and people voluntarily discard. They're still functional older computers for the newer models. And so that's not a function of the thing being less reliable. That's just a function of newer generations of those devices becoming even better and being affordable, making it worth your while to walk away from your old one and use the new one. I didn't mention automobiles. You're not old enough to remember, but if you bought even a Cadillac, Cadillacs back then, they were the car. That was a rich person's car back in the 1970s. It needed a tune-up every 25,000 miles. It didn't have keyless entry, by the way, but it was not as durable as a Toyota Camry is today. People did keep cars longer back then. I think that's because cars are becoming less costly as a percentage of household income, and so. What's that?
Not in the Midwest.
What do you mean not in the Midwest?
4 or 5 years and they rusted out.
Oh. Yeah, in the upper Midwest. Yeah, the snow and. But I did see data that the average length of time that people keep cars is what's that? I heard it was lower. Really? Okay. Well, I mean, I don't want to argue the point because I don't have the data, and my memory's becoming deficient, so I can throw it away. Yeah, but either way, the quality of automobiles, and even the cheapest automobile today doesn't need a tune-up for 100,000 miles. So a lot more. Cars it was not unusual at all to be driving along. I don't know about California. I grew up in New Orleans, so it might be biased by the weather, summer weather down there, but it was not unusual at all. Almost every day you'd see a car on the side of the road, the smoke pouring from the hood, because the radiator burst. You just don't see cars break down today like you did even just 30 or 40 years ago.
I had a follow-up question.
Mm-hmm.
So on that point, it seems like some businesses seem to try to motivate the consumer to rebuy a product by making it break down right after the warranty expires in some cases. And another point is that there was more repair shops back in the 70s, to fix a TV rather than rebuy one, where it would be more costly now to keep on repurchasing TVs when they break rather than repair one.
It's more costly. I don't think there are TV repairmen anymore that come to your house. Back then it was cheaper. It was too costly. The best way to it was too costly to buy a new TV. You got the old one repaired. I've heard these stories about companies intentionally, making their products shoddy. I don't buy them. Not for competitive products. I mean, if you look at the quality of. Over time, the course of the quality of products, it's improved steadily over time. There's this old saying, well, they don't make things anymore like they used to. And that's exactly true. They make things better, by and large, than they used to. Almost everything is better, more reliable. There is an optimal length of time for a product to last. That length of time is not infinity, but companies will lose out in the competitive race. It's a highly competitive world out there if they intentionally made their products to be more shoddy than consumers expected. If consumers buy a product from XYZ manufacturer and XYZ's products fail more frequently, XYZ is out of business because its customer patronage is shifted to other firms. Yeah. Planned out. That was the term. I think John Kenneth Galbraith came up with that term, right? Yeah.
I come from
Mark.
I come from a country, and I'm of an age that remembers when television sets were rented by the masses. But I'd like to thank you for a very entertaining and actually very thoughtful talk, particularly towards the end. There's just a couple of observations I have. One is it's interesting actually, the free market crew as a whole tend to take this as evidence of improvements. Sizable improvements in the standard of living. And without disputing your numbers, I'm more inclined to say it would be I tend to respond more like it would be a lot better if it hadn't been for all the regulation we went through. In that sense, there's a different sort of take on it actually. But my specific question is this, and I can imagine, I know that this criticism has been made of these sort of numbers, and that is that the rents in many areas have risen in terms of the number of hours you have to work for them. And I suspect the rent that I pay for my small apartment here is a lot more in terms of my hours than it was when it was built.
Housing has gone up in price.
And housing is a lot more important to most people than the TV set.
Right. You can adjust for quality, and then we can get into reasons why it has gone up. But yeah, I think housing, education, and healthcare are all, no matter how you measure it, more expensive today than they were in the mid-1970s. Housing is probably the most egregious, I think, education and housing is the most egregious cases. By the way, so many of the books that I bought many years ago in which I learned economics was sold to me by this man who's complaining about his rent.
Is that your response now?
Oh yeah.
Okay, good.
I just wanted to let Mark know that I still remember him gouging me these high prices for Philip Wicksteed's Common Sense of Political Economy.
The real price of books has fallen. In fact,
oh yeah.
Electronic?
Yeah.
No, not the electronic. The real price of printed books has fallen very recently. If you look at retail, as you know.
Yeah.
The retail price of books.
Yeah. It's probably not true for textbooks, but other than that. Yeah, I think textbooks you do need a mortgage to buy, but.
I'd like to thank you all for being here. I want to give another hand to Don for being with us.
Thank you all.
I encourage you all to come join us at Flames, and I look forward to seeing you at the next provocative lecture. Thank you.